So if there's anything I can say to you today or direction I can give you today, I certainly will. Oftentimes, especially in a situation which is quite complex, like yourself, I will listen to your story and we'll try and identify some of the legal issues, and we can come back together. I can take it away and do a little bit of research, follow up with an email, follow up with another phone call. So we have lots of time today, but you also have lots of time if we want to reconnect again. So there's no rush. So I've gone through, to be honest with you, fairly quickly the documents that you provided to me. I didn't go through them in depth at this point. I think probably the best way to proceed today, if it's okay with you, is for you just to give you the floor and tell me your story. And I'll take some notes. I noticed 3 areas that you've identified as certainly having some questions, and that's around, of course, your issues around your divorce and your matrimonial property and the custody of your children and your support, and issues all related to that. We've also talked a little bit about TSSD and your attempts to get income support from them, so that's another issue. And you also talk about your RNC report, so I see that as another issue as well.
Sorry, what was the last one you mentioned? I didn't quite catch that.
You sent me a link to the report that you mentioned, RNC.
Oh, RNC, yes. Sorry, I heard RSP.
Yeah, so
okay.
Yeah, so those, and again, from looking at your documents, I mean, we're not, just have to speak about this, but I see those as sort of the 3 areas that you've identified. So I'm going to hand it over to you now. You can just start. Like, I don't know anything about your background other than what you've told me in your documents, and everything that you tell me, of course, is solicitor-client privilege and is confidential. And so why don't you start where you feel comfortable to give me a bit of background, to fill in the blanks, and then we can talk about what legal advice I can get you or what questions you have from a legal perspective.
Okay. Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to take notes while we do this. And it's quite complex. And so when you have questions, often what I may end up doing is guiding you to a place on my website, which you can later reference to get clarification on my answers, if that's okay with you.
Sure, no problem at all. And you can provide me, like I said, this may take a little bit of time between the 2 of us because it's lots of materials, but we have lots of time. So if we don't get through everything in this session, we can certainly have another session.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So my website is currently, it's pfi.rocks, and the PFI initially stood for People First Incorporated. So peterfrankigloo.rocks.
Okay, pfi.rocks.
Rocks.
F as in font.
S as in Sam, like rocks, paper, scissors.
S,
rocks.
Okay, gotcha. All right, and you can just
rocks.
Yeah, you can just email that to me as well. But go ahead.
Okay, I'll just make a to-do list as well then. Okay, so on that website, which is a work in progress, it's my 3rd attempt to expose a massive crime syndicate in Ottawa. Anyhow, on that site, the last tab says About Us, and on the About Us tab, if you were to scroll down, you would see my CV. So with respect to my background, I am currently 57 years old? Could be 58. I'm not into birthdays. But I was a very successful, professional, loving mother of 2. I have a 4-year honors business degree, chartered financial analyst designation. I started my first consulting firm in 2003, Advisor on Track. I built an online prototype for a practice management methodology software. That IP was probably stolen So I converted my business model for Advisor on Track to just basic process improvement consulting and government consulting and just all sorts of consulting because I have quite a diverse skill set. So ended up getting married to what I've been told is a covert malignant narcissist. I didn't realize this. He's an excellent actor. I didn't realize how wicked he was until the veneer kind of came off once we had children in 2006. My son Sean was born in 2006, my daughter Kate in 2007. And by the time they hit about 5-6 years old, I realized there was something really off about this guy. And as soon as he knew I knew, then everything but the bruises, abuse increased. And I say increased because right from the get-go, there was always what I now know is referred to a narcissistic cycle of abuse, where you get the love bombing, and then there's dismissal, and then there's discard, and then it starts over with the apologies and the love bombing again. And when you're not aware of that cycle, or if you're not aware of the machinations of a narcissist, then you kind of give them the benefit of the doubt, especially if they were introduced to you from what you thought was a friend. So to make a long story short, when tensions escalated and looked like divorce was imminent, I had a nervous breakdown in 2013. Now, our mental health industry is such that when someone has a nervous breakdown, psychiatrists ask the family, or in my case, the husband, what happened. So to cover his tracks of weeks and weeks of heavy fighting and screaming and all sorts of things, he lied. And he made up some story about my having bizarre behavior. So I ended up with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. So that's a bit of my CV. That's how it started. I can taking you down what he's managed to accomplish by leveraging crooked psychiatrists and exploiting the weaknesses of that industry is a book unto itself. Suffice it to
Deidre?
Yeah.
Deidre, sorry. I'm going to interrupt you there for a second. I hope you don't mind.
Not at all.
I just got I got a couple of little questions just about what you told me so far, and then I'll hand it back to you. So when you were married, when were you married?
2000, July 22nd.
Okay. And where did you live? Did you live in Ontario throughout your marriage?
Yes, Ottawa.
Okay, so you lived in Ottawa, and you're living here in St. John's now, is that correct?
On the advice of an attorney, I fled Ottawa last July to attempt to have my probation order, this is another book, my probation order transferred to another jurisdiction to have the unlawful child abusing conditions dropped, as well as to file a police complaint against a massive Ottawa-based crime ring in which Ottawa Police Services are complicit.
Okay, all right, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you're doing really well with giving me a chronology. I'm sorry I interrupted you. So where we have in the chronology right now is you were married in 2000, that when your children were born in 2006, 2007, you realized at that point that you were in a very abusive relationship and things were not going well. That in 2013, you had, when you were talking divorce, you had a nervous breakdown, and there was a diagnosis of bipolar. And I think what I hear you saying with regard to that diagnosis is you feel that is incorrect and it's based on sort of falsities from your ex. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely it is. And I was able to, I mean, when you're stuck in a psych ward, you're not able to prove much. And I've actually heard the words from a psychiatrist to the Consent and Capacity Board of Ontario. She's so sick she doesn't remember what she's done. once I was able to get out of there, I was able to go back and say, here's evidence of the lies, where my husband said I was depressed for a month, I flatlined severe depression. I was able to show my gym records. I belonged to 2 gyms at personal training sessions. I was able to show my Visa card statement, which showed me doing the usual Christmas shopping, it's grocery shopping. I showed my list of emails, which demonstrated that I was working on my contracts, as well as all the things I was doing with the kids, skating lessons, Christmas parties, you name it. So I was able to disprove his allegations of depression and mania, because I can describe all the mania lies he told. So in 2015, I was able to have that diagnosis removed and replaced with something they called psychosis NOS. So they acknowledged that there was no what they call mood disorders in that industry, but they acknowledged, and I agreed with, a psychotic break. What they refused to acknowledge was that it was abuse induced. So in 2015, that diagnosis was changed to brief psychosis NOS by the Ottawa Hospital psychiatrist, Gary Kay.
Okay. Deidre, I'm going to interrupt you again just to shoot so we can go through chronological. So tell me about, well, we can talk about that for a second, and then we'll go back and talk about your divorce and your child custody issues. But
Sure.
while we're talking about that, let's talk about that a little bit more. So you indicated then that initially the diagnosis was bipolar, and you indicated that that was based on what you believe were, inaccuracies and lies on behalf of your ex. But since that time, there's been another diagnosis, which you acknowledge your diagnosis that you just indicated to me. Are you seeking treatment for that right now?
Well, this is the thing. So abuse-induced psychotic breaks don't need a treatment. They need a removal of the abuser. So while he was still in my life and able to threaten me and my children in the special way that he does, I was still experiencing breaks and near breaks, but I got pretty good at recognizing them manifesting. In 2015, I agreed to attend the Ottawa Hospital's occupational therapy program, they call it. And what it is was the only positive thing I can say about the Ottawa Hospital at this point is that this occupational therapy program would help the group identify how whatever it is they were dealing with manifests. So, for some people, anxiety and psychotic breaks, in my view, are, anxiety driven. I can write, based on what the research I've done into my own conditions, I've learned a lot about what's wrong with the industry. But anyways, so this program would teach you how to recognize how your own reactions to stress, let's call it, whatever it may be, how it manifests. So some people will get the sweats, let's say, or have a rapid heartbeat or whatever. And once you acknowledge what how it manifests, then you develop your kind of action plan on things to do before your last resort, which is perhaps an anti-anxiety. So I got to the point where I was given 3 prescriptions and trusted to, the word they use is titrate. So manage them, adjust them, or whatever on my own. Because when you're aware that your fear is going to manifest in a psychotic break, then you develop steps. So for example, for me, what are my 8 steps that I would try to do to sort of decrease my fears that he's going to, murder my daughter and frame me for it, for example? Well, you go to the gym and throw around some iron, because that really helped me to reduce the anxiety level. So they would say in this occupational therapy, okay, well, what if the gym's closed? Then what do you do? I said, well, I would go to the hot yoga studio because it pretty much does the same thing. And they say, okay, well, there's a power outage, so you can't do that. And so basically this program would walk you through, as a group, each individual would identify, 8 things or whatever their steps would be until their last thing, which is, okay, I better pop a clonazepam. And they recognize that those kinds of pharmacotropics have severe side effects. And so, for example, clonazepam has been linked to the early onset of Alzheimer's. So nothing you really want to be taking regularly. The other thing they prescribed to have in my back pocket was Zopiclone, which is a Imavane. I'm not sure which one's the brand name, which is the trademark. I'm not sure, but it's Zopiclone or Imavane. It's a sleeping pill. And so when I was super worried for my children when they were with him, when we had shared custody, sometimes I couldn't sleep. So I tried those, but I found they were incredibly addictive. And when I looked into those, I found, wow, it gets to the point where they actually create insomnia. So I managed to remove myself off that one before that happened. And the third one they prescribed for me to use when necessary was olanzapine, which has, for me, the severe side effects of dread, drudgery, and suicidal ideation. So I learned how to use those when required as a final step, but I haven't touched those since really 2018. And my children were unlawfully apprehended right after the divorce was set in February 2019. So I'm not sure where you want to go next. I can keep talking about my experience with the mental health industry if you like. I know quite a bit. I'm actually a whistleblower on it.
Yeah, okay, so why don't we park that for a minute, because that's an issue you want to talk about, and sort of get some more of your story out in terms of some of the other, sort of your history and where we're going to focus in on sort of extracting some legal questions for you. So why don't we talk about, so you obviously at some point your husband or your ex-husband and you broke up. Tell me about what happened in terms of matrimony, home, divorce, access, custody, because I assume it's been, so when did you actually leave? When did the breakup happen?
Okay, there's 3 of them. And actually, before I move on, I just want to close the loop on that. So after the psychosis NOS diagnosis, I hired the top psychologist, arguably the top psychologist in Ottawa, to follow me for a couple of years. We did a bunch of tests, and she revised or fine-tuned that diagnosis to brief psychotic disorder with marked stressors. So it's not as if I'm driving down the street and all of a sudden I get really nervous about being on a highway and I suffer a psychotic break. The marked stressor was fear of my husband. So I want to be very clear. So that is the actual current diagnosis, is brief psychotic disorder with marked stressors, and she added in her opinion letter that anyone under my circumstances would have had the same experience.
Right.
And this is where I argue this is not a mental illness. This is a defense mechanism to an abusive, to torture, basically. Anyways, so he arranged for my hospitalization twice. After my initial nervous breakdown, it's as if he studied up on gaslighting or psychological abuse, because psychological abuse does trigger, if you suffer enough of it and you don't know what's going on, you don't understand how it works, it'll trigger a psychotic break eventually. So when it did that, he would just again lie to have me hospitalized. So he forced my hospitalization for 6 weeks in 2013. And even when the doctors called him to say she's fine to go home, he'd say, no, she's still sick, keep her. So that's how much power a covert malignant narcissist has in Ottawa. And he did the same thing in 2014 basically caused a nervous breakdown. I drove myself, or maybe I got a ride that time, I can't quite remember, to the hospital. I tried to explain to doctors what was going on. He called while I was being assessed, lied to them, and said, if you don't form her, so if you don't force involuntary hospitalization, I'm packing up the kids and going. So I was there for a voluntary admission, seeking help on escaping an abusive husband. He called, lied, and had me admitted involuntarily, continued to lie. Someone gave me the advice, said, you're never going to win in here. Just agree to the lithium and get out and fight it from the inside. So that's what I did. I spent 8 weeks, lost a consent and capacity board, which is actually a hilarious transcript to read because it just exposes the incompetence of, at that time, the head of psychiatry there was a Dr. Yolande Charbonneau. And to read this transcript where I very clearly articulated everything, the whole process is laughable. Anyway, so when I finally got out of there in 2014, one of the gifts my ex was able to provide for me was a community treatment order for bipolar disorder. The only way for me to get out from under that was to move from Ontario and seek help in the Quebec system. So our first separation, I would argue, was July 10th, 2014, when I fled to the hospital. And when I finally got out, I leased both a condo and a new vehicle in Quebec, because in Ottawa it's right across the bridge from Gatineau Hull, which is, so Ontario-Gatineau Hull is the Ontario-Quebec border. So it was easy for me to move there temporarily and still, make it home before my kids woke up to make them breakfast, so they wouldn't know anything yet. So I did that. He begged forgiveness. I still wasn't sure. I still wasn't aware of the gaslighting. I knew something was going on, but I hadn't found the evidence yet. And so he, through his incredible acting and tears and sobbing, managed to, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. He says that the doctors twisted his words. He didn't lie. They were incompetent. And, meanwhile, the nurses at their hospital are saying, don't leave. Do you really want another woman to raise your kids? All sorts of. So I'm getting so much pressure not to leave, I went back. So that was 2014. I finally ordered my medical file. So meanwhile, I'm working, taking care of the kids, doing everything I normally do. And started going to the gym, all sorts of things. Well, actually not started, but just continued to get my fitness back because I was just in the hospital for 2 months. And so I ordered my hospital files, and I finally go through the mess that they are, and that's when I found the smoking guns, where he lied to have me committed involuntarily in 2014 for 8 weeks. I missed an entire summer with my perfect kids. And so I confronted him. I separated immediately. I ordered a bed for the basement. We have a very nice finished basement. I still own half of $1 million home in Ottawa, and redesigned the whole thing. It's on the water. It was quite nice. So when I found the evidence of all of his lies in that's called psychiatric abuse, I separated. I alerted him. I made the mistake of letting him know I'd be seeking a divorce for cruelty, and that's when he plugged in. Sorry?
Oh, so that was 2014 or 15?
That was September 26th, 2015.
15. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
So as soon as that happened, then he ramped up on the abuse fear again to trigger another break, and I wasn't. That's not when I found his how-to manual at that time. So it actually worked. Again, I drove myself back to the crazy hospital and said, "This is what's going on. I can feel it coming and have a break." So 2015 is when I snapped out of it within 24 hours because they finally listened to me. I like, don't give me all these other meds that don't work. I just need some sleep and to talk to someone to feel safe. So they listened, snapped out of it within 24 hours, agreed to the occupational therapy. I sought a lawyer to try to get a divorce for cruelty. No one in Ottawa would help me. So while I was attending occupational therapy in the Ottawa hospital, I mean, I had day passes, so I was finishing up a professional contract at Ottawa University. I was on the board for the Ottawa chapter of the Canadian Mental Health Association because I was trying to be an advocate and raise awareness on the fragility of mental health when in an abusive relationship. I was getting my hair done, going to the gym, and at home every night to tuck my kids in. I just had to make sure I was back at the hospital to sleep and attend their program in the morning. So of course he twisted all of that, and instead of me being able to serve on him what is Ontario is called a Form 8A application for divorce with grounds, he served me first with the Form 8, as well as an emergency custody and access motion because I'm severely mentally ill and dangerous. So he basically twisted the whole thing, instead of him being the dangerous parent, of me being mentally ill and dangerous. So that was the second separation. I left immediately, and we were doing a nesting arrangement with the kids, a 2-2-3 nesting.
I'm sorry, Deidre. So we're in 2015, and you described to me when you left, but it was at the same time that you were doing the program through Ottawa. And so you were at the program in the day and at home at night. And then at some point, I guess, when he served you with the divorce papers and asked for an emergency order for custody, you were out of the home by then?
I had purchased another home by then. That's another crazy story. So what I was doing at that point is I was there for when the kids woke up, make them breakfast, lunch, drive them to school, and I would leave. I'd be tucking them in, reading them stories, tucking them in at night as long as I was back to the hospital by 9. So while I was going through that process and seeking a lawyer, he served me one day while I was at the hospital with an affidavit and notice of motion, like an application and notice of motion, just
Right.
full of just full of lies.
Right. And so you didn't return to his house or your house or the house you had together after that, did you?
Well, I had to because I wasn't financially prepared to endure the legal warfare that followed. So even though, so I returned. I'll skip the details. So I was forced to return in April 2016 because my family law lawyer was basically working in cahoots with his family law lawyer.
Okay, so was there ever an order from the time that he first served you with the divorce documents and the emergency order? Was there an order with regard to custody at that time?
Yeah, so what happened, he never actually followed through on the emergency notice of motion. He served it on me, but he never followed through. What that was designed to do was force me to get a lawyer as soon as possible because I knew nothing of family law at that point. And so once I was directed to this lawyer who basically was in cahoots with his lawyer, he didn't need to bring that notice of motion anymore. The wheels were in motion. So the next thing that happened was it was just sort of this odd situation where it was like a 2-2-3 split, if I recall. So he would leave the home when it was my turn to be there with the kids.
Okay.
So that's where you leave the kids in the house and the adults take turns leaving instead of house swapping.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. No.
So
that went on. So at that point in time, you had another home where you stayed when you weren't with the children.
Correct.
And he must have had another home where he was when you were with the children.
Well, no.
Correct?
So nesting. So we have the $1 million home. So basically, what happens is he would leave when it's my turn. My 2 days, he'd go stay with his sisters. And then on his 2 days, I'd go back to my own bungalow. And so we'd swap back and forth. And the theory is that it's less disruptive for the kids. In practice, it's horrendous when you're trying to do that with the abusive spouse, because basically I just end up being a maid service, because on my time the fridge is empty, there's no food made, the place is a mess, and I'm supposed to parent my children and enjoy my children with this with trash pit. Whereas
how long did that arrangement go on for?
Well, and that was the problem. So while that was happening, they would just toss over malicious allegations through the lawyers, and I was being, I think they billed me, I think $25,000 in either $25,000 or $40,000 in 6 months to accomplish absolutely nothing. So that's why I had to return, because I was being bled dry financially, and that, I had no choice. So anyways, so I returned April 2016, and then started upping my lines of credit, applying for more credit cards, just kind of doing what I could with the best I could with the kids. And then he ramped up the gaslighting. I recognized it this time because I found basically his how-to article on, how to gaslight someone into a nervous breakdown. And so when I recognized that starting up again, I called the CAS, I called my doctor, I called everyone. I said, okay, it's starting up again. And then I called my lawyer, who at the time I knew they were super expensive, but I didn't know what else to do. So I said, okay, I'm going to separate again, but I need to just, get ready this weekend, so I don't want to serve him until Monday. Well, somehow he found out, somehow he ended up texting me separation first. So the final and third separation, to make a long story long, was November 27th, 2016.
So what happened there? So you physically left the house at that point, did you?
Yeah, at that time I purchased a nearby 2-bedroom condo, and we, with a crooked mediator. I mean, I know all this now. I was just so naive going through the process. I didn't know anything about family law rules. I didn't know there were so many conscience-free family law participants. So basically, an agreement was mediated. Interim parenting agreement was mediated, which set me up for financial ruin. Basically, it gave us shared parenting time, or whatever, shared custody and access of the kids, of my children, and but didn't speak to support. So his abuse just became severely financial on top of everything else, because I was trying to shield my kids from the ugliness of this divorce, and we loved our little bungalow. My little bungalow, I did it up as best I could, but it wasn't the $1 million home on the water, and they knew it. So, but we made the best of it. A nice safe street that they could bike on. They could bike to their friends' house. We had a great time in there. But because there was no fair support, this is another story. I tried to bring a notice of motion, and that's where I got more evidence of the corruption in the courts. And basically, it's court-enabled fraud is what happened. So I had to move us out of that beautiful little bungalow, probably. So first we were in the condo until I could kick out a recalcitrant tenant. Then I got back into the bungalow and had to sell it, about a year after we moved in, and moved to a townhouse just to access the equity, because instead of being awarded the $7,500 a month that was calculated via divorce maid, he got, with the lies and deception and everything else, he got away with only $1,230 a month in spousal support and $345 a month in child support. And so I was trying to...
Sorry, did you say that again? So at some point then there was an order of child support of $1,230?
No, that was spousal support was $1,230. I had zero income in 2017. Despite my best efforts, and zero income in 2018, if I recall.
Okay, so how much was child support then?
$345 a month.
Okay, so were you sharing parenting then? Were the children going back and forth at that point?
Yeah, it was shared parenting. So I had no income, but his support was in total about 1575. But here's the kicker, and here's where the really sly fraud comes in. On top of that, there was 50-50 shared children's expenses.
Yeah.
Now, at the time, he wasn't helping out. You know, I had a tutor for my daughter. Like, a whole bunch of things were happening, and not only was he not fairly sharing expenses, any things that went to his house during his time would end up broken. And so he was doing everything to sabotage, basically, you know, everything. So anyway, so basically the whole thing was designed to drive me into financial ruin. So I survived all of that 2018. Meanwhile, I won a motion. I should mention this. The end of 2017, I won a motion in family court to seek damages of his torts and crimes in a family court setting. I'm not sure if that was precedent setting or not, but because I had so much evidence of what he had done to me, I was able to seek damages, you know, things like bad faith under the family rules of Ontario's Courts of Justice Act, and costs and everything else, but also a list of about 12 torts, including attempted, at the time it was attempted parental alienation.
Yeah.
And three crimes, one being criminal harassment, one being mischief, and one being defamatory libel, which actually is a crime under Section 300 of the Criminal Code. So one of the things I'm attempting to do now in family court, I mean, we're still married. This is ridiculous. So basically what they did, I'm jumping ahead, but I'm going to just summarize. So what he's done, since knowing that I wanted a divorce, is he's circumvented the protection that should have been afforded Sean, Kate, and I via the Divorce Act by utilizing multiple provincial acts, exploiting the corruption that exists, and leveraging the incompetence. And there are enough loopholes built into the system that have fully enabled him to do this and create such a wild backstory that it's almost impossible to believe that it's not true. And
so 2017, continue to bring me through, I guess, the process of where you are with your custody and access. So in 2017, you were co-parenting, 50-50 expenses, split expenses, which was very difficult for you. And then you told me the amount of child support. So take me then from there to where we are now in terms of the custody and access arrangement.
Okay, so the family court judge that was assigned to us basically ignored all the evidence of domestic violence, pushed for, we had, I think, 3 settlement conferences where she was attempting to get me to settle, and I wanted to go to trial. So finally, in the end of 2018, she requested a document from me that basically had to prove I wasn't mentally ill. And nothing from him. So it was totally ridiculous. However, I produced one that was quite good, and I had to submit it December 31st, 2018, and she set a trial. She put our divorce finally on the trial list for September 2019. So within 8 weeks, no, not even that. So right after I filed a kick-in document and served it and handed it over to the CAS and the Auto Police Services Board that had it uploaded in their database, trying to get help from anyone I could. Then my children were unlawfully ripped out of my living room on February 1st, 2019. They had no warrant. My children were not in imminent danger or any other kind of danger, and
sorry, Deidre, when you say, do you mean by your ex-husband or by child protection?
Yeah, basically in Ottawa, Child Protection Services is a front for human trafficking, and so basically he just plugged into that arm of the CAS. They showed up at my house with 3 police officers and took my
The
children.
children were taken, okay, the children were taken from your home in September 2019.
No,
I'll say child protection, but you were armed as that. Okay,
sorry,
what happened?
they were taken February 1st, 2019, and handed over to my husband. So even though the police had evidence of domestic violence going back for years, and even though the CAS had evidence of domestic violence, and even dropped off Christmas gifts and said, geez, how have you been managing this? In 2019, they switched workers to someone who basically just stole the kids and handed them over to him. Now, I don't know if he was paid. I don't know how that all works, but nothing was legal. Nothing.
So then there would have had to have been a court hearing. Was there a court hearing immediately after that?
Yeah, a court hearing after that where there was I received no materials because of how it's rigged, right? I was served the materials. I mean, they didn't even tell me when the hearing was. So I showed up at the courthouse on both the Monday and the Tuesday, just sort of hanging out in the courtroom to find out when these people were going to show up. That's when I received their malicious documents, and it was impossible for me to defend myself. And I knew at this point what was going on. It was ridiculous. So I'm aware now of the corruption. And
so were you represented during that hearing? Did you have a lawyer during that hearing?
No, because I'd been self-repping since I got rid of. So what happened? So now we're going back to 2017. My family law lawyer continued to gouge me and was attempting, charging me a fortune every month and refusing to book a trial, refusing to move things forward to trial and trying to force mediation. And I just kept saying, mediation is not going to work with this guy. He's trying to bury me. And so I had no choice but to walk away. I tried another attorney who charged me $7,000 in 1 week and advised terrible advice. It advised me to take a dividend instead of seeking support, which in Ontario works against you. So I just sort of gave up on them and was representing myself at that time.
Okay, so what happened then in terms of child protection? Did you get any access to your children after that, or how do you?
Well, what happened is they made it basically, and I think it's actually I think illegal, based on the documents I've read. They're not allowed to subdelegate. The Superior Court of Justice is not allowed to subdelegate minimum access to a child protection service. Minimum access has to be defined in the court order. They did not do that. They said access could only be done at or via the Children's Aid Society, and communication was at the discretion of my husband. So basically, he refused all communication, and CAS refused access.
So have you not had any access since then? Correct.
It's actually now, you're jumping forward now, it's actually illegal because the next thing he did is he leveraged the criminal justice system on me. It's illegal for me to contact my children's teachers to see how they're doing. And
so there must be okay, so you haven't had any access to your children since 2019?
Correct.
Okay. So there must be an order of some sort which outlines that, which prohibits you to have any contact with them? 2 of them.
So the one that is most restrictive is a probation order.
So there must be,
I haven't committed any crime or been convicted of anything. I can.
So tell me about. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be
interrupting. That's okay.
I'm just trying to follow through. I'm trying to follow the chronology. So we're at a point in 2019. Child services were involved. Mm-hmm. The children were taken. They're with your ex right now, and so when you talk about and so there are orders, one of which is a probation order. So that.
Okay, hang on. I'm going to take you back for a sec because what's important is by the end of February, they obtained a a restraining order. So on top of the custody and access order, by the end of February, based on false allegations, they were able to include a restraining order preventing me from being near my children's school or house.
And a criminal matter probably arises from an alleged breach of that. Is that right?
Well, it eventually gets there, but before that happens, there's more fun. So, on my way to a CAS hearing scheduled for March 14th, 2019, I am arrested in Quebec, falsely accused of flight from peace officer, and detained until the end of April. On April 8th, 2019, on April 8th, three things happened. I was declared not criminally responsible by a crooked Quebec positioned psychiatrist based entirely on the false collateral information provided by my husband. So the exact same way he was able to have me committed in 2013 and 2014 was the same way he was able to have a not criminally responsible opinion issued for a crime I didn't commit. Now,
so just to go back, so you were charged. What was it you were charged with? You just indicated flight from police. Is that what you were charged with?
Yes.
And at the end of the day, you were acquitted because you were mentally ill, that you're not criminally responsible.
No, because they came up with the opinion, and the judge tried to convince me to use it, and I said, he goes, just agree to go get treatment and you won't have a record. And I said, I don't need treatment. I'm not bipolar and I didn't commit a crime in the first place. And so after arguing with me for 20 minutes, he said, okay, fine, we'll set a trial date. And so I defended myself and I was fully acquitted because there was no flight from peace officer. It was an entirely bogus charge that prevented me from attending my CAS hearing. That's how deep this thing goes.
So you have no criminal convictions and there's no outstanding charges right now.
Well, I'll get to there's one outstanding charge that I was extorted into agreeing to flee Ottawa, but I'll save that. That brings us to 2022. I'd just like to highlight the three things that happen on the exact same day. This is how coordinated the sick and twisted syndicate is. It's totally systematized. On April 8th, 2019, that Quebec NCR opinion was signed. The emptying of my 3-bedroom, very well appointed townhouse was completed through an eviction scam that no one told me about. And a final, not final, custody and access order was signed off by a senior Ontario Superior Court judge when nothing was served, filed, or heard properly. I was in no position to defend my materials because I was stuck in a psych ward and everyone knew it, and he refused an adjournment.
So that final custody and access is 100% custody to your ex and no access to you.
It was an kind of an interim final order. It was a weird order. It was just, if you look at the details of how this order was obtained, there was nothing legal about it. So the ones who participated are actually guilty of Section 126 of the Criminal Code, disobeyed statute, because they disobeyed the Child, Youth, and Family Services Act. They disobeyed the Rules of Procedure in the Courts of Justice Act. It's insane. These things are at this point are guilty, and I've opened up a police complaint, and I'm in touch with the RCMP about this now. But it's beyond child and child abuse and fraud. At this point, it's actually meets the definition of torture, human trafficking, and domestic terror or terrorist activities in the criminal code. I've been basically trafficked through every level, literally every level of every branch of the judicial system, with the exception of the Supreme Court of Canada so far. I've been.
Deidre, tell me then, let's continue with your story. How did you get then from, day in 2019, and then, so that's 2019, and you have a court order which denies you any access. So what happens in...
Oh, there's lots more. That was just the interim final court order. It was just so bizarre. But anyways, I wanted to highlight those three things happened on the exact same day. The illegally obtained Child and Family Child and Youth Family Services Act order, the eviction was finalized, and the NCR opinion was finalized, all on April 8th, 2019. And then I was acquitted.
Right.
And then at this point, it's been pretty bizarre. So far, I was having a pretty lousy first 4 months of 2019. And I fled to the U.S. to try to figure out what to do. I got everybody accusing me of being severely mentally ill. I know I'm not. I'm trying to talk to the kids. He won't answer the phone. So I send them gifts. I just go to U.S. for safety. I empty my safety deposit boxes and I start, trying to figure out what's going on. I try to make connections. And I think, at some point when I win this divorce, I might move to Windsor and just work 6 months in the U.S. The U.S. has a different model for psychiatry. I really wanted to help other victims of narcissism, victims of narcissistic abuse. And because psychiatry is publicly funded here in Canada, the services are suboptimal, let's say. Whereas in the U.S., I think victims have a better chance of getting support. So I was trying to make connections, and because of my background, my business background in practice management methodology, I could basically just sort of reapply a lot of my methodologies that I was using for financial advisors to independent psychiatrists who may not be as well trained in businesses and marketing as I am. So I went to the U.S. to do this while I continued to fight for my kids. The divorce was scheduled to happen. The trial was scheduled to happen for September 2019. So I thought, I'm just going to build up more credibility and allies and everything, and then go in and nail this divorce. I come back to, meanwhile, no one's letting me talk to my kids, see my kids. I come back to Ottawa. I finally violate this illegally obtained, child abusing CAS order by going to the house, the matrimonial home, to tell them the truth. Because at this point, he's told my 11-year-old daughter that I moved to Texas because I didn't want to be her mother anymore. And that nothing could be farther from the truth. I actually never spent one night in Texas. So he would just make up stories to smear me. And so I said, enough is enough. This is crazy. So I packed up 2 duffel bags worth of evidence against my ex, Superior Court of Justice Judge Tracy Engelking, who used to work for the CAS, and all the evidence I'd accumulated since 2013. And I went to the house to try to tell my kids the truth. I was immediately arrested and then charged with, among other things, criminal harassment, because Kiska happened to go in, my husband happened to go in the same day to report after getting advice from the CAS, charging me with criminal harassment. And I was denied bail. I have no history of drugs, weapons, violence, nothing. Auto Police Services Board was well aware of a history of domestic violence, and I explained the whole thing to the charging officer. I explained I had all the evidence in my duffel bags with me. They refused to look at anything, and by the following morning denied me bail. And basically, while I was in jail, the goal was to have me found guilty of multiple crimes that I didn't commit, and then also seek an NCR opinion. It was totally orchestrated. that was July 2019. By the end of August, they had added break and enter and changed all of the summary conviction crimes to indictable. At one point, I was threatened with by a Crown prosecutor. Looked at me and goes, "Yeah, the maximum's life." And then another prosecutor said, "Well, we might agree to some sort of probation order if she pleads guilty to, like the B&E." So I was charged with B&E on my own home where I stole nothing and had no criminal intent. I managed to get out of there somehow after 90 days. So I served 90 days in remand. They were up to 7 charges by that point. And I hired 2 lawyers. I had no choice but to hire 2 lawyers because CAS was threatening to have Office of the Public Guardian Trustee appointed so that I couldn't even defend myself and bring my own evidence in the CAS hearing, the final CAS hearing. They were seeking a summary judgment motion against me and attempting to deny me the ability to represent myself. And on the criminal side, they appointed an amicus curiae who was, at a minimum, one of the most incompetent persons I've ever met in my life, and possibly just part of the syndicate. So to shake the amicus curiae and to shake the guardian and trustee crooked lawyer, I hired 2 lawyers that were advised that I seek out from the bail house that I was forced to live in, and they ended up just being crooks as well. Now, the bail house was actually run by a pimp who was busted in Bowling Green, Ohio, 10 years earlier. So our bail house that's operated by Elizabeth Fry in Ottawa is run by a pimp, and it's basically cheap food and housing for hookers and dealers, I learned. So anyway,
so you eventually went to trial. Were you convicted of any of those offenses?
No, by the time, well, then I was arrested several more times between 2019 and 2021, and so I eventually got a lawyer who sort of helped, but then I'm not sure what happened at the end. And she basically looked at my charges and she says, well, you can't actually plead to any of these. And I pretty much knew that. For example, 2 of the charges were mischief, because I entered the house to try to tell my kids the truth after they'd been, denied any communication. So they were in contempt of the court order for 5 months before I violated it. So I finally went into the house and to tell them the truth, and Section 430 sub 7. So Section 430 is mischief in the criminal code, and sub 7 says specifically if the act was committed for the purposes of communicating, it's not a crime. So I knew right out of the gate, I wasn't harassing anyone. We're court ordered to communicate for the benefit of the kids. He's denying communication. I wasn't unlawfully in my own dwelling for any unlawful purpose. I'm trying to stop child abuse. Sure, it's only emotional and psychological child abuse, but what's the difference? So if I went to the house and he was raping my daughter, would that still be illegal as well? So the charges were all bogus, and so this lawyer said you can't actually plead to any of these, and I wanted to go to trial anyways because I wanted case law for other victims of the CAS. But she says don't do it after she saw my files and how much they were basically, there was a crime called conspiracy to prosecute, and they were guilty of this. The Crown prosecutors, the cops, my ex. So she says just agree to this one charge. We'll go for an absolute discharge and get out of Ontario and try to fight for your kids from somewhere else. So I said, okay. We had this huge package I created. I had my psychotherapist or social worker at the time do a letter saying this is all so very, very, very wrong. I had all these exhibits of domestic violence, but my sentencing hearing was scheduled for after a long weekend. So either the judge didn't read anything or he's just a crooked judge. So basically, I don't have a criminal record. I haven't been found guilty of anything. They dropped all the charges except unlawfully indwelling. The dwelling is my matrimonial home that I still own half of, and the only reason I was there was to try to put an end to the child abuse and tell my kids the truth.
So did you get an absolute discharge on that one charge, did you?
Nope, she didn't bring it up at all. She just agreed for whatever reason, instead of seeking an absolute discharge, she didn't say a word and just agreed to everything the Crown wanted, which ended up being a conditional discharge. I have a conditional discharge, which is basically all it is 3 more years of not being permitted to talk to my kids. Like, if a rapist, if someone had raped my daughter, he would have more rights than I do right now.
Okay, Deidre, thank you for, this must be very, very difficult for you. It's a lot of information that you're sharing with me, and I just want to acknowledge it must be difficult for you. It's a long, horrendous story, and let's just take a minute. So we've got to this point right now. So you still haven't seen your children. There is a criminal charge, conditional, and I assume then at the end of that, that's the reason why you moved to Newfoundland?
Well, yes. So, and before we go on, I'll just take you back to my site for a second, because if you want to see the probation order and the charges they were up to, that's evidenced on my site. I'm just going to double check where I move tabs around based on whatever I'm doing at the time. So if you were to go to, again, the About Us tab, but instead of clicking on it, and you scroll down to the second in the scroll, there's something called Criminal Justice Newfoundland Style. And if you were to click on that tab, and I'll put that in the email where my current probation order is.
Okay.
Oh shoot! Why am I not connected? Hang on, I'm just not connected to the internet all of a sudden. Anyways, I'll email you. Oh, there we go. If you scroll down and you click on, there's both the last release order that shows that evidences that they had me charged with B&E and 5 counts of criminal harassment and 2 counts of mischief, a whole bunch of stuff. And then it shows the probation order of last May. It's slightly redacted, but it just shows some of the ridiculous, again, one of my conditions, which I'd say is anti-charter, is that I'm not permitted to speak, not permitted to contact my children's teachers. So I haven't been found guilty. I'm not even being accused of anything remotely related to any sort of harassment, assault, nothing. And I'm not allowed to send them a birthday card without a court order.
So, Deidre, so you're here now. You haven't. I guess the bottom line of what I'm trying to tease out, at this point is, I mean, I know you're asking a general question. You've gone through a journey. Is where do I go now? But I guess the question is, where's from a legal perspective, in terms of the family law matters in and of themselves, and I can tell by that you're a very articulate and well-read person, so much of this you already know, I'm sure, is you know what the family justice system is, you know the process is there, you know that in order to make changes to orders of custody and access, that you have to go through the family court process to do that. So I'm sure you know that, and that would be involving retaining a lawyer locally and trying to sort of start over and see what you can do to obtain some access to your children. I'm sure you know that. Is that the question you have for me, or is your question broader?
Yeah, so it's broader. So here we go. So the Divorce Act is federal legislation, and I'm still married to my husband. And Divorce Act dictates custody and access, which is now called parenting time and decision-making time. And in ascertaining that, it was recently amended to codify that a judge must consider domestic violence, which including but not limited to financial abuse and psychological abuse. So I literally couldn't have more evidence of psychological abuse and financial abuse to justify that he should have zero decision making ability and zero parenting time. And so the Divorce Act has federal paramountcy over the provincial Child, Youth, and Family Services Act. But this just goes back to what I said. What this syndicate does in a very orchestrated manner is it utilizes provincial legislation, such as the Ontario Mental Health Act, the Ontario Courts of Justice Act, which houses the family law rules, the Child, Youth, and Family Services Act, Ontario Courts of Justice to charge someone with, crime. So they've utilized, well, even though I know the criminal code is federal, but they basically utilize those pieces of legislation to circumvent all the protections that would be afforded Sean, Kate, and I if I were ever permitted to get a divorce. So yes, that's coming. However, I'm already well aware that there isn't an ounce of justice available at 161 Elgin Street. The place is a playground for sociopaths. I've got dirt on over 30 judges, 6 Crown prosecutors, 3 dozen cops, Children's Aid Society, 3 dozen lawyers, Office of the Children's Lawyer. So this brings us to the Ministry of the Attorney General. I've got dirt on federal cabinet minister.
So is your question? So you understand that. I mean, like I said, in order to make changes to your custody and access order, it's only a court that can do that, and there's a process by which you can do that. Now all of what the factors that are taken into account is something for the court, but that isn't. I mean, you're having issues with, and you pointed out a number of
I'll wrap it up. I'll wrap it up for you. I'll wrap it up for you. Okay, so why am I speaking to a human rights lawyer?
Okay.
I'm speaking to a human rights lawyer because I think that I finally am in a position to, among other things, at least partially say this is a hate crime. And the reason I say this is because every time I've been trying to do my best to keep up with the statute of limitations in civil court. I'm well aware of the crimes that are committed via family court. So fraud was committed via a motion for interim support. It's black and white.
So those are allegations. Just breaking it down, right? Because human rights. There's a Human Rights Commission, and the Human Rights Commission, Human Rights Code, specifically, and there's a broader view of human rights. Human rights in our Human Rights Act here in Newfoundland, prohibits actions against people based on personal traits such as race, gender expression, so forth. That's
well, and this is where I'm getting to, right? So I am.
But then there's a bigger. Sorry to interrupt you, teacher. So there's that, as I'm sure you're aware. Then there's a lawsuit. There's a civil lawsuit for torts, and you've taught, and I'm sure you understand the torts. You've spoken to me about them against whomever caused you, whomever perpetrated those torts against you. So. Are you suing the courts? Are you suing the Ontario Ministry? Are you suing the police? I mean, is that where you're going with this? A lawsuit against those who you feel have wronged you or have committed torts against you?
Yes. So I've already got several in the works. So the crooked psychiatrist from Quebec, that one's ongoing. My lawyer who set me up from financial failure, that should have been completed, but due to a violation of the rules of civil procedure, that has not been completed due to another crooked judge. There's so many crooked judges involved. So I've got that one. That's 2. Kiska's involved in the.
Okay, so you have those claims. So one against judges, one against.
No, not judges, not child protection yet, because again, to keep up with these little monsters, I've got to schedule everything properly, and I'm watching the statute of limitations, which is 2 years.
Right. So you're
So
Okay, so you're aware.
so
Go
so
ahead, I'm sorry.
my so one of so I made sure to issue my statement of claim against Ottawa Police Services Board before that 2-year statute of limitations
Right,
expired,
right.
which would have been July 26th,
Yeah,
2021. That's when I issued my statement of claim against them for $13.2 million.
okay.
Now, there's another one on the go against the two shysters that screwed me over when I was in the bail house. So currently, already going are 5 civil actions. I have intentions and tons of grounds to bring another one against the CAS, my ex's lawyer, as well as Ontario Ministry of Attorney General, due to the Crown prosecutors who were guilty of malicious prosecution, bearing exculpatory evidence, perjury, fraud, all sorts of things. So basically, I have currently 5 on the go, and my intention was to bring 3 more. Plus, I intend to bring an application to have my malicious probation order changed. Plus, I still have to divorce Kiska. What Ottawa Police Services has done is, instead of moving on to discovery, and even though they know all of this, so they have chosen to bring an application to have me declared a vexatious litigant.
Wow, yeah.
And I am not vexatious. I mean, at this point, I'm a whistleblower on like over 200 of them. And that list is available on my site. I'll send you the specific link under a subdirectory called VIS for Victim Impact Statement, which lists just the top 5 crimes I could think of that, they're basically committed of. And it all rolls into Section 21(1) parties to offense, whereby if you're aware of a crime being committed as defined in the criminal code and you omit to do anything, either do something to continue it or you fail to do something to stop it, you've established your own liability with respect to, again, domestic terrorism.
Okay, so Deidre, so you understand that process, and you've already started down that road.
So here's the thing. The chair, this decision to continue to pursue this vexatious application has happened since a new chair has been appointed to the Ottawa Police Services Board. This chair is Jewish Gail Yenta Beck, who is also the Chief of Staff for Ottawa's Royal Ottawa Mental Health Centre. That's the decorated psychiatric torture chamber that we have there. She's actually a child psychiatrist, and she's just been put in charge of the Ottawa Police Services Board. Since one of my civil actions is a $3 million civil action against the 2 Jewish lawyers, one who screwed me over in criminal court for the benefit of my ex, one who screwed me over in both CAS and family court for the benefit of my ex, both of them have a lien on a $250,000 lien on my $1 million home in Ottawa. That's the only way I could retain them. Both of them screwed me over. Will not remove this lien from my home, as I am less than 2 weeks away from living in a homeless shelter with 0 income. So I think I'm in a position finally to bring some sort of human rights action based on my religion as a follower of Christ, by a Jewish chair of the Ottawa Police Services Board has all the evidence they need that I have been severely tortured by this syndicate to protect her Jewish friends, Joe Adelman and Gonan Sneer.
So, Deidre, in terms of just on the human rights, and I can provide you with some information on that. We do have a human rights commission, and whether or not they would take that particular case to have their own internal assessment process. I can provide you with some information. But, I don't think that, in terms of the civil actions that you've started, because, my role, as you know, to help people make decisions as to where they go next with particular grievances. And you've already way past all that, right? You're much more versed on these particular areas than most people that I talk to. Most people, they talk about a civil action, I have to tell them what that means. You know that. They talk about a family law matter, I have to tell them about the court. So I can't really offer you anything there in terms of the kind of, information sharing that I usually provide in these sessions. But I can provide you with some information about human rights and whether or not I can't do an assessment of whether or not that's the case they take. That's where is there anything else any other information that you think that I can provide you to be helpful here?
Oh no, I think I've got all the other areas covered on my own. The only one I have no experience in human rights. So at this point, it's all academic for me. I know the judicial system is nothing but a playground for sociopaths, and I know law enforcement is nothing but a front for organized crime, and I know the Child Protection Services is a front for human trafficking. So I'm already aware of all that. At this point, all I can do is share make my experience as involved as possible, share my evidence of it, and try to make other people aware. Because if I was aware of all of this back in 2013, I guarantee you I would have financially prepared, grabbed my kids, and left the country. There's no way I would have attempted to divorce in the cesspool that is family court. There's no way. I would have gone into hiding. I'm a citizen in Europe, in Ireland, by birthright. So I would have fled knowing what I know now. So I'm just reaching out to you to see if you have anything to add. The other thing, too, that's interesting is even though Newfoundland's Child Senior Social Department, even though they're aware of the fraudulently obtained spousal support order that I have, which forces the 50-50 sharing of expenses, which when you think about it, what it does is it would convert me from a recipient of support into a revenue stream. Because at this point, he's living in the $1 million home wearing Hugo Boss driving a Volvo. The mortgage alone on that home, my 50% of that for the 2 kids is going to be...
Yeah, I took a quick look at the information in regard with your so you've applied for income support, and what I understand is whether he's paying it or not, and he isn't, there is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there is an order that's out there which says that he is to provide you with spousal support. Is that right, or has that been extinguished, or is there another order?
No, it exists, but the problem is it was crafted to convert me into a revenue stream. So if I've got 2 teenage kids and they're involved in sports and they, eat decent food, which I'm sure they don't anymore, but, he'll just say, well, the house costs this much and the mortgage and insurance and property taxes, it's just simple math. So if the house costs...
The issue here is, if your issue is your income support, what income support is saying is that at least on the books, he's supposed to be paying you this money, which he is not.
No, it's a loop. It's a loophole.
They're taking that into consideration when they're assessing your income, your eligibility for income support, right? But you're not getting that money. So what they're saying is, well, there's an order, so you have to go and try and enforce that. And they've indicated an agency that does it. But what you're telling me is he hasn't paid it in years, and
no.
So you have to.
Okay, so a couple things. So he stopped paying it in January as soon as the Ottawa Police Services Board issued their vexatious application to have me shut out of all forms of justice, which is what they're seeking. So in January 2023, as soon as they decided to go forward with that, he stopped paying his $1,230. If I register this order, what happens is SEA, which is the Support Enforcement Agency in Newfoundland, they enforce both sides. So what'll happen is they'll get in touch with Ontario. They'll make sure the 1230 comes out of his bank account and goes into my bank account. And then he'll say, well, the kids cost me $4,000 a month in housing and food and activities. So half of that is $2,000. So what'll happen is the 1230 will go into my bank account. The 1230 will come out of my bank account. 770 that's missing that I allegedly still owe him due to this fraudulent court order will then now become an outstanding liability of mine that I will eventually owe him. So not only, and then, so basically, the net effect of me in a real time is $0 in my pocket. And this is the loophole. The welfare people here, the CSSD, they only acknowledge the revenue. They don't acknowledge the expense, the forced expense. So they say, well, you're entitled to $1,100 a month from us. But you're getting $1,230 a month from him, so therefore you're entitled to nothing. So
yeah, but he can't change. He's not. I mean, it might be moot, but I mean, if there is an order saying that he owes you $1,250, that can't be changed unless the court changes it. Right now, he may be able to go to Ontario court and change it quickly, but that's. But you know, they're not going to be able to change. He's not going to be able to just take one off without it being another court order.
No,
right?
no, no.
So
It's a two-part order. This is the scam. It's an intentional scam. It's a two-part order that says you owe her $1,230 and she owes you half of the children's expenses. So he can create that number and make it be whatever it is he wants. And then say to SEA, well, sure, I owe her $1,230, but she owes me $2,000. So they'll enforce all of that. So the net, and because
yeah.
do you understand? So
have you? I'm sorry. I mean, I know you haven't had much luck with lawyers before. That's what you've described to me. You know, but there's a lot of issues there. And have you sought? I mean, have you sought assistance from legal aid to try and sort some of this out for you?
Yes. That's another story. Trust me, you know. Like, I mean, the whole in Ontario, Ontario's a hub for human trafficking, and it's very complex.
Have you gone to legal aid here in Newfoundland?
They didn't return my call. At this point, no one will touch me with a 10-foot pole. I'm a whistleblower on not only the police force behind the capital of the country, but the mayor who runs the city, because the mayor is also on the board. So I'm a whistleblower on the city of Ottawa and all of its ugliness. And no one will touch me with a 10-foot pole. Plus,
okay.
A legal aid lawyer is only permitted, they're awarded an hourly rate an X number of hours. It would take me, I don't know how many hours to get anyone up to.
If you got a staff lawyer, I guess they'd see what they could help you with. Dietra, I'm going to, there's a lot of information you have given me. I'm going to take this away now and go through your notes and run through your website. I'm not really sure what I can do for you in terms of, I can provide you with some information in terms of where you can look next and some information about human rights. And then, you know, if you need anything further, we can have another session. But I am going to close the session now. And like I said, I'll take a little bit of time to go through our notes and connect back with you.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. And the only other thing that's possible, if you knew of a lawyer, because they have to be practicing in Ontario or licensed to practice in Ontario. So either that means they're dual licensed, or I just communicate with someone in Ontario. But they have to be brave enough to take on, you know, not only the mayor of Ottawa, but the CAS. And the CAS is funded by our lovely premier, Doug Ford. So you know.
Okay, I'll see if I can find someone with that dual and let you know. All right, thanks so much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Good night.
Thank
Okay.
you. Bye.